I'm a PI and my client asked me to stalk her. It only got weirder from there. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Being a PI sucks. It's not what you think. It's pretty much harassing women. Men hire PAs to go harass their wives and girlfriends, and once in a blue moon you get asked to find a missing dog, or to harass a man instead. But that's it, really. Sometimes I'm looking for hard evidence of infidelity, but a lot of the time my clients just want to rattle the soon-to-be ex. To make them paranoid and jittery, and less reliable in a courtroom, or less likely to pay attention to small print agreements that stiff them out of the holiday home. So that's my job. I'm a pawn, and it is almost always on behalf of the kind of men who think women reading a book in public are secretly looking for male attention. I don't have an office. I did for a short while. But things are tough, as I'm sure many of you know, and PI work isn't exactly lucrative. I don't know why I'm still doing this job, except to say I'm my own boss, and it's not easy out there. I went into this with vastly different expectations. If anyone wants to hire someone who was convicted of insurance fraud while training to be a police officer, let me know. Otherwise I'm on my own, following people in cars and sleeping in dingy motels. So when someone reached out looking for a guy to stalk them, I just figured it was a fetish thing. I got a nephew who went to art school and makes big bucks painting cartoon characters doing fucked up stuff. He ain't painting the Sistine Chapel, but he pays the bills and looks after his family. I figure if that work is good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So I met the woman and was surprised at how normal she looked. It was in a public place, a park with a nice bench. And even though it was starting to rain a little, we didn't let it bother either of us. We sat there, 2 tape recorders running, and hashed it out. She said she liked me. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have gotten out of her car. That was flattering coming from her. Good-looking woman. Professional. I didn't know at the time, but I quickly figured out she was a forensic accountant. Anyway, we got talking. She never gave me her motivation, but I would later come to understand her as an amateur narcissist. She was new at loving herself. She was smart, accomplished, and actually rather beautiful, provided you didn't spend a great deal of time agonizing over things like symmetry or eyebrows, and instead paid attention to how a smile reaches the eyes, or how laughter sounds when it catches someone by surprise. But she grew up dirt poor and spent her teen years unable to visit the dentist, or access a gym, or even just eat home-cooked food that wasn't microwaved. Plump frame, blotchy skin, hair she kept short with a pair of scissors because her and her mother relied on the shampoo and soap they stole from the motel where they shared cleaning shifts. When she fumbled awkward questions at some of the better-looking boys in her class, she rarely met with success. That's not to say she was an outcast either. She had a social life. It's just poor kids have to grow up early. Prom's a luxury. Eating isn't. If you know, you know. Otherwise, you might be surprised by just how fucking tough it can be for some kids in this country. Anyway, she got out of that hole, fought tooth and nail, got an education, a good job, and by the time she finished her victory lap and took stock of her life, she was 35 years old and 1,000 miles from the trailer she was raised in. And she looked good. The woman in the mirror was a stranger that she wanted to get to know. I think hiring me was an act of self-love. I think if she could have, she would have sat in a car and watched herself get a cup of coffee, spying closely at the professional-looking woman doing a little half-run, half-skip to get out of the rain. The way she stood in line rocking back and forth, on her heels to the music in her AirPods, thinking no one would notice. She wanted to admire herself, but unable to time travel or clone herself, she instead resorted to hiring me as a kind of proxy. I had my own boundaries, of course. They covered anything that was gonna get me in trouble. The gist of the contract, after a nice week spent meeting after work and talking, was that I was to follow her as often as I could and just observe her. Photos, videos, secret recordings, occasionally a little bit more. Nothing physical. For example, one time I inventoried her handbag after she left it in a taxi by accident. I'm not a photographer, but something about all those knick-knacks laid out on a motel bed, snapped with a black and white Polaroid, it looked good. Like something you'd see in a fancy gallery. Avant-garde, my nephew would say. She loved it. Paid me a bonus for it and everything. Anyway, this carried on like this for about 6 months. They were interesting times. Tailing her across train stations, racing across open parking lots to install a tracker on her car, standing on a bridge and dropping an AirTag in her bag as she walked past. It was a little bit like being a spy. She even paid for me to buy high-end equipment. Crazy stuff. One camera, I could sit on my balcony and read the texts on her phone from a block away. Occasionally there were days where I couldn't or wouldn't keep up the required intensity. Stalking requires a lot of cardio. When that happened, when I didn't feel like following her into a crowded place or sprinting halfway around town following her car, I'd do research. I'd investigate who this woman had once been. I created fake Facebook profiles and tracked down old school friends, spoke to former teachers, lovers, all of that. The whole job was a matter of mapping her out, like she was a country, you know. And a country isn't just hills and rivers and borders. Countries have history. She was happy with my initiative. The text she sent me when I showed her the research folder was a glowing commendation. First one I'd had in a long time. It was nice, someone telling me good job. She had a real way of making me feel like a kid getting a gold star. I didn't realize at the time, but I was putty in her hands, head over heels, bless my stupid heart. Of course, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I'd had just enough time to grow overconfident. I made the mistake of thinking that I wasn't going to find anything in her past that'd give me trouble sleeping. Boy, did I get that one fucking wrong. Her mother. That's where things took an odd turn. Now I knew from news reports the mother died in their trailer, while her daughter was off staying at some boyfriend's place for a few days. Natural causes, it read. I wanted to know a little more about what natural causes they were. Figured if there was a congenital thing, it seemed like maybe I ought to know. You'd think the way the trailer park owner reacted to me asking about it. I tried asking the Russian government for proof of a democratic election. Thin, reedy little woman who gave me hell the moment I mentioned a name. What do you want to know that for? Who's asking? Who's paying you? Why you want to dig this shit up? Oh, she ripped me to pieces. I put it down to the natural sprinkling of crazies in the standard population and took a different tact. Started calling out the older folks in the park. Residents. Every single one of them put the phone down on me the second I mentioned her name. Well, all of them except one. Some people want to talk, and this old bastard was one of them. He had a lot to say about everything from the president to social media, and I let him ramble on before starting to press my point. Told him at the start I was a historian looking into the local area. That made it so it wasn't too suspicious when I began asking about this and that. Slowly making my way to the death of a 53-year-old woman a couple trailers down from him some years ago. Again, soon as I mentioned her name, there was a change in the air, even over the phone. For a second, I thought this old guy was gonna hang up just like the others. Could hear him smacking his dry lips as he mulled it over. Francine didn't deserve what happened to her, he said after a while. She wasn't a good woman. Didn't treat her daughter too good neither, but didn't deserve what happened. Maybe if they'd found her earlier, some of those fellas in white coats could have got more evidence, put that little wretch of hers away. But from what I understand, weren't much left of her at all. Then he hung up, leaving me with a whole lot of questions. This frustrated me. I had, until now, had a fair bit of luck at this new profession of mine. They say be careful what you get good at. Sad truth was, I was getting good at stalking, and this was my first real roadblock. I remembered the way I felt when she told me good job, and it bothered me I couldn't really say much about this critical part of her life. That and, well, maybe I still got a chip on my shoulder about being a failed policeman. If you give me a problem, I can sometimes drive myself crazy looking for a fix. So I hopped in my car and drove to the trailer park, down near on the other side of the country. Don't know I was hoping to find. No way the trailer was still there, and it wasn't. But what I found odd was the lot hadn't been replaced. There was a hole in the ground, about the right size, and nothing else. Just an empty spot where the trailer had once stood. And the trailers on either side weren't occupied either. I could tell by politely and legally looking through the windows. Most of them were cleared out, but a few weren't. They still had plates and other knick-knacks left hanging around, like the owners had left without bothering to pack. You shouldn't hang around there, mister. The girl who appeared stood a good 20 feet away, shouting over the wind so as to be heard. Smell can make you awful sick. I wrinkled my nose, aware of the odour she was talking about. Had been since I approached the empty lot. A faint musty smell that made me think of an exotic pet shop. What do you mean? Smell makes you sick, she said like it was self-explanatory. Woman who died there left behind an awful stench. Made the neighbours sick, and the neighbours' neighbours, and so on for a couple trailers in a row. No one likes to live there now. Still can't. Had a couple move in a year or two back, and they got sick too. Daddy says it's a bad one. Not even rats go near that hole. The smell wasn't pretty, but this trailer park looked like the kind of place where hubcaps went missing regularly. Figured they would have been used to bad smells. What made this one so special? I looked over at the girl. Where is your dad? Few minutes later, and I was stood outside a trailer waiting pensively. The little girl had disappeared inside to fetch her father, and since then I'd been sat listening to the quietest trailer park in the whole world. Crickets and silence. Traffic on a distant highway. Place was dying. That much was clear. When the father finally did make an appearance, he said nothing for the first few minutes. Lit a cigarette, offered me one. I refused on account of having quit some time back. After a while he spoke up. I'd invite you in, but if you've been hanging around that old lot, not sure I want you inside my home. No offence. None taken, I replied. Sally says you're a historian. The man wasn't terribly old. Mid-30s at a guess, but he looked me up and down like I was a teenager caught throwing eggs at his house. What are you really? P.I., I replied. Now that makes sense. Some relative looking for answers. Heard the Hendersons had a sister with money. That's exactly it, I lied. She didn't buy the official story. Nor should she, he replied. Henderson was fit as a fiddle day he moved in. Weren't no justice in what happened to those who got sick. And poor Francine, they say she died of natural causes. Man, even back then, and I knew it was shit, and I was just a little kid. The smell alone. Think it's bad now, but at the time, before they came in with a crane to lift the trailer up whole and move it to the dump, shit, it was something awful. There was talk of moving the whole park. Course, no one gave enough of a shit about us to go ahead and actually do it. What did she die of? Don't know. Only thing I am sure of is that that girl of Francine's lied. Said her mother was live and well when she left before the weekend, and they was all on good terms. But that was bullshit. We had 'em fighting for weeks before, for one. And of course the body, state that was in, ain't no way it'd been rotting for just a few days. He offered me another cigarette. I refused. He lit it up instead. Second one in what felt like just a few minutes. Made me itchy just to see. I wanted to say something, anything to get a little bit more. But I'd told a big lie pretending to be there on someone else's behalf, and didn't want to catch myself out. So I just sat and listened to the quiet buzz of his little patio light. After the second cigarette was done, he reached into his back pocket and took out an old photo. "I hope you find justice for Henderson and the rest of them," he said. "Only real bit of proof I ever had something fishy went on." He handed me the picture. Wasn't easy to see what I was looking at. Pile of old leaves, maybe. Mulch. I squinted at it for a few good seconds, but couldn't make heads or tails of it. What? Took that the day they arrived to get rid of the trailer. Had to stand on my friend's shoulders just to reach. What is it? I asked, my skin starting to crawl as I picked out details. Whatever I was looking at, it was slumped on a sofa with floral wallpaper in the background. It was about the size of a man, but riddled with holes and cavities the size of golf balls. In my whole life, I'd never seen something that looked like that. "Why, that's Francine," he said, or at least what was left of her. He let me keep the photo. At a guess, that was the only interesting thing that ever happened to that man, and he'd been waiting to share it with someone. All I had to do was give him an excuse. He seemed to take some pleasure in passing it on. Certainly found my reaction to it amusing. I must have gone pale as I grappled with thoughts of what had happened to make a body go bad like that. Back in the hotel, under a good light, I checked that picture again and again. Something about it made me deeply uncomfortable. Knowing a woman was under all that, all those holes and crevices must have been made in her flesh, and what happened to her skin that turned it such a funny texture? Looked furry, like the kind of thing that grows on top of a long-forgotten cup of coffee. A part of me considered asking my client about this, but I knew that wasn't the way to go. First, she probably wouldn't tell me good job if I had to ask. She hired me to do a certain thing, and that didn't involve politely requesting information right from the source. Second, well, I'd read the police reports, what was publicly available anyway. And she'd made it clear she'd left on the Friday and came home on the Monday and... Well, what if that guy was right? Did she really leave her mother alive and well? I mean, people kill. Not just psychos. People like you and me. We do it every day, and sometimes we even pull it off. Only half of US murders get solved. That's a fact. If anyone could be in the right half of that equation, it'd be her. She was smart as hell, my client. Even at 17, she would have been a clever one. Clever enough that she might easily have been able to cover her tracks. Gone over to some boyfriend, twisted his arm into giving her an alibi. Sure, I could see that. I just needed to figure out what the fuck was going on with that crime scene in the trailer. Thankfully, I got some friends still on the force, one of which I even have a bit of leverage on. At first he couldn't find much on the actual mother, but then I asked him to see if he could take the photo I had, show it around, and see if anyone had seen something like it before. That proved a lot more fruitful. Few days later he came back with a strange one, but straight away I saw the connection. I'll spare the details. Old man was found in a tub, all sorts of fucked up, in some old apartment building. It had since been condemned on account of the body, which is fairly weird, since bodies don't usually cause that much fuss. but less weird when you realize that said body was in such a bad state it made 3 people sick and caused long-lasting structural damage. Whatever happened to this guy, it ate through the tub he'd been lying in and seeped into the floors and walls below. Turned plasterboard to shit, and apparently even caused some trouble for the sturdier elements like steel and concrete. I don't know how that works exactly, but that's what the file said, and going by the photos, I didn't feel like anyone was lying. As for the pictures, what can I say? Made my fucking skin crawl. No blurry little Polaroids snapped by a kid. These were professional crime scene pictures that showed something in a bathtub that didn't register as human until my eyes went looking for details. He looked like a hairy paper wasp's nest, only there were fingers and nipples and other little things that made it clear it had been built using a person as the framework. No face though, just a head like a pile of used paper plates. Looking at those photos made me learn a new word just to describe how I felt. Trypophobia. Wasn't just the one guy either. Building was linked to the disappearance of the ground floor tenant, some computer geek. I didn't worry about him too much. But what did catch my eye was there was only one woman living in the whole place. 2nd floor apartment. The registered name was somewhat familiar, close enough to a certain someone's that it raised the hairs on my neck. Police at the scene managed to get a photo of her, and sure enough, there she was. My client going by a different name. Clearly something fishy was going on, or else why the pseudonym? I figured it possible she'd maybe offed her own mother. Parents and spouses make the most common victims. But what connection was there to that second corpse? And what about the missing guy? It was like a horror movie was following her around, and she was just blissfully unaware. Condemned buildings and festering trailers made for a far cry from the professional accountant who enjoyed oat milk lattes and used sweetener instead of sugar to spare her teeth. But there was no denying she was the connection. There was photographic proof she'd lived in that building. If I wanted to get ahead of this, to really understand what was going on, I had to figure out what had happened to those bodies. I pretty much exhausted my favours with the police, and truth was they didn't know any more than I did. But it turned out the building was still standing. Condemned, but they hadn't demolished it, partly because no one wanted to take responsibility, but I reckon it might have had something to do with the biohazard warnings slapped on every single window and door. Good thing I brought a gas mask. I waited for sunset, geared up, and entered through the unlocked door. First thing that hit me as the door swung open was the smell. Similar to the trailer park, but full pelt and hot as hell. Made me think of lizards and poorly kept terrariums. Strong enough to make my eyes water even through the mask. One thing was clear as I took a look around the hallway. The building was diseased, not just run down or decrepit like the usual urban decay. This was something else. Looked like the inside of a clogged pipe. You know how lime scale fills it up? It was a bit like that. This oily rust-coloured fluid had seeped down the walls and left them glistening and soft. Ropey stalactites of the stuff hung down from the ceiling like old party banners, and I edged around them afraid of what might happen if one touched me. Best guess was that stuff was digesting the place. Anything soft or organic was going or gone. Old umbrella frames were left standing in one corner, the fabric burnt or dissolved away. The carpet was reduced to just a few patches no bigger than my hand. And a bunch of old cardboard boxes piled up under the stairs had turned squat and half liquid, almost flowing down and around each other. The worst came when I took a look in the back room. More of a broom closet, I guess. Wouldn't have gone in, but something caught my eye. A well-worn shoe that wasn't covered in that oily shit. Sign of recent activity. That, and the way the door was ajar, just raised my suspicions. so I took a look. Even now the timeline eludes me, but someone, a vagrant most likely given the way they were dressed, died a nasty death in there. Chemical burns come to mind. They were bowled up in one corner, eyeless, looking up at me as I pushed the door open to take a closer look. Pink flesh threaded with red blood vessels, yellow bones poking through here and there. From the looks of things, they'd been trying to work the door open. You could see a history of their escape attempts left by bleeding hands. Rust-coloured finger streaks ran all along the door's edges, special attention paid to the hinges. And he'd broken the only window and tried hauling himself up there, only to realise it was barred from the other side. The jagged glass that still clung to the frame was covered in old blood. His palms must have looked like grated cheese. Eventually he'd given up and lain down in that shit, and the thought of it made my chest feel heavy and tight. I'd only been in the building a few minutes, and that shit was already eating through my shoes. I could hear the thick rubber soles sizzle and pop with each step. But that guy had been forced to sit down in an inch-deep puddle of the stuff, likely because exhaustion had left him no choice but to tough it out. So how long had he tried staying upright? Hours? Days? Weeks? Him getting stuck in there had to be deliberate. I was sure of it. A feeling in my gut. Someone had locked the door behind him and left him to die slowly. God only knows why. But did that mean they were still hanging around and waiting for a chance to get to me? Looking around, I sure didn't feel safe or alone. The shadows seemed too deep, and the steady drip, drip, drip of that rancid oil oozing out of every surface was too monotonous. Someone or something lived in that filth, and chances were they'd been responsible for that poor vagrant's agonizing death. That meant getting out of that shithole was a priority, so I made for the stairs and started the climb. If there were any answers in that place, it'd be in the apartment where that old man died. The crime scene tape was still hanging off the door frame when I found it, and the TV and sofa, or what remained of them, stood in the same place as in the photos. Back in the day, the old man had been a hoarder, and I was surprised crime scene hadn't cleared all his shit out. It was all still there, only what had once been a chest-high maze of papers and magazines was now just a kind of hardened pulp, almost like magma dried mid-flow. Whole fucking place was covered in the stuff like a coral reef, growing up the walls, and even patches of the ceiling. Looked a hell of a lot like a wasp's nest, and it looked to be the source of that oily-looking fluid. You could see it sweating out of every crease and fold in that strange hive. It was almost hypnotic to look at. Glistening amber beads oozing out of papery sheets that flowed like rock striata. There was a gentle, barely perceptible rhythm. Hypnotic. I don't know why, but I reached out and ran the tip of my finger as gently as I could along the surface. It felt like the underside of a mushroom. All those papery gills, gossamer thin, soft and inviting. I wore no gloves, and the brief moment of contact had deposited a single bead of that strange syrup on my fingertip. It caused a tingling sensation that was not entirely unpleasant. Even the blood that trickled down my knuckle felt warm and wet, like testing a hot bath with your hand. I liked it. I liked it, and I wanted more. I went to reach out and push my arm into the nest when a hand burst out of the nest and gripped my wrist. I was so surprised I didn't even make a noise, but instead wordlessly fell back as the hand pushed me away from the nest. A very nearly skinless forearm followed, and soon after a face emerged from the papery nest like a grime-covered nightmare. Black eyes and a lightless mouth. It was a man that could have passed for a corpse, like a half-digested piece of meat. Terrified, I struggled to my feet and realized that this person had broken down near every bone in my wrist with that single grip. "Your meat smells raw," He growled before heaving himself out of the nest in a disgusting parody of childbirth. My sanity flickered, and the next thing I knew I was on the ground floor with bleeding eyes and both hands frantically pulling at the door handle. My mind returned in pieces. I blinked red tears away, but didn't stop trying to open the door. I felt it, that urgent need to leave, like a suffocating man feels the need to breathe. But I fucked up bad. I'd sniffed out the closet and saw the trap laid there, but hadn't seen the larger one set for me. There was only one way in and out of that building, and I hadn't jammed the door open. Now it was shut, and nothing I did could get it open. With more time, maybe I could have pried the jamb or even kicked it down, but my heart was racing and my vision blurring. I wanted out of that place. A hot primal need to get the hell out. The air was too hot. My mask too stifling. Sweat condensed on the inner plastic and made it damn near impossible to see. And the pain in my wrist was a throbbing explosion that made sensible thought impossible. I'd realized early on into my little foray that I was underprepared, but the scale of what that meant eluded me, until I was there wrestling with thoughts of exposure and contagion and disease, fumbling at a greasy doorknob with a broken hand, while suppressing thoughts of what might be crawling up my leg, or back or neck. Panic threatened to consume me. The world and all the normality it represented was right fucking there. I could hear it. The distant hum of traffic. The amber glow of streetlights that lit up the biohazard posters. Not 30 minutes ago I'd been there, safe and far away from this waking nightmare. I was being reduced to a prey animal. Even in the moment I could sense it happening to me, being made into something lesser, but it was like my actions were no longer my own. When I finally gave up on the front door, I turned around and saw the shadows way back at the hallway begin to shift as something descended the stairwell. There was no other way out. No door, no window, just me, a long corridor, and a nightmare coming right at me. Something inside me gave up. I don't know how to describe it. I'm still not sure if it was that building and that strange fluid that seemed to warp my own thoughts, or maybe there's just too much one person can go through. But I could practically hear the thin membrane of my sanity tear as I fell backwards into the door and slid down onto my ass, breathlessly awaiting my terrible fate. I almost contemplated turning off my light, but by then it was too late. I could see him coming towards me. He was legless. Nothing from the waist down except blackened viscera, trailing up the stairs behind him. He pulled himself towards hand over hand with hungry eyes. Before I knew it, he was on top of me, one hand gripping my mouth with a salty palm, the other stroking my hair. And then in an instant his demeanour changed. He pulled back with a terrified cry and scrambled away like I'd just stuck him with a blade. "No, no, 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 no," he muttered. "No, you should have said I didn't know. I thought you were another one I didn't know. I thought you were here for me. I didn't know you were hers." He cowered away, pedaling on both hands backwards while keeping his eyes fixed on me. "Tell her I did not know you were hers. I could not smell, until I was close, very close. If I hurt you, I am sorry. Tell her, I am sorry. I did not mean to hurt you. It is just I do not get to eat often, and am always hungry." With a rapid gesture, he threw the key for the door at me. It skittered across the floor and fell just short of my feet. "Tell her I did not know." "What are you?" I stammered. He looked at me curiously, stopping his retreat only briefly to gauge my expression. She likes to be seen, but I looked without asking, and I got what I deserve. "Who are you talking about?" I asked. He very nearly laughed, but with such deformities it was mostly a drooling guffaw. "You know," he gasped. "Don't be stupid. You're in love with her, just like me, but different. You got permission. I didn't, but she was good. She left me an old nest to live in, and I have permission to eat anything I kill or trap myself. Hard now the people know to stay away, but sometimes I get lucky. His eyes flicked to the closet with sickening hunger. What has this got to do with her? I asked. What colour are her eyes? He replied, almost manic with excitement. Answer, answer. Tell me, tell me. What colour are her eyes? I stopped. The word felt wrong in my mouth. No, no, he chittered. None of those. Seemingly excited but afraid, he raced forward momentarily and gripped my lapels with twisted glee. Compound, he hissed with such forbidden pleasure. Our eyes are compound. She's jealous of us, you know. Jealous we get to love her. And then he disappeared into the darkness, and something inside me gave way entirely, and I passed out. I don't know much of what came after exactly. I was found a few hours later in my car, idling at a traffic light. I'd made some effort at getting away on my own, but didn't get very far. No surprise here, but I got sick as a dog going in that place. A deep chest infection, the kind that scares everyone at least once in their life. Only fair given how fucking stupid I was. But forgive me, I hadn't anticipated nightmares beyond human comprehension. I challenge anybody to think that fucking far ahead. You think junkies. You think flies. Squatters. But that guy, that man slipping out of the nest and barreling towards me on 2 hands. My mind going sizzle-pop along with the soles on my boots. In real life, shit like that always sneaks up on you. So I paid the price. 6 months. Jesus. 6 long months. I got every fever you can think of. Sepsis. Kidney failure. Liver failure. Month after month drowning in my own fluids, coughing up shit that made the nurses gag and leave. I asked the doctor what the long-term effects will be, and he winced before reading a list of things that didn't leave much hope for happy retirement. And if it was hard on my body, it was even worse on my mind. Those fever dreams. Doctors say what I remember in that building, that was all just part of the sickness. Say I spent a good 3 days in a coma, and strange dreams are the norm. Which I might accept if it weren't the fucking skin graft still healing on my right hand. No one can explain that. My client visited, just the once. There are universally sad moments in life, and one of them is realizing someone you have a lot of affection for doesn't have it back. They have some, just not the same amount. It was always one way though, wasn't it? I saw her every single day, but if I was doing my job right, she only saw me once a month for our meetings. Our arrangement ended not long after, so I hope anyway. She left like it was nothing but me. Jesus, it felt like someone excavated my heart right out. Even after what she told me why she was there, even after what I did, I could barely stand up straight, I was so heartbroken. There were times after that I wished the sickness would just take me. Maybe that defeatism is why it got so bad. Who knows? She came to me looking for a recommendation, of all things. She wasn't cold. Far from it. But there was a sense of disappointment as she sat beside me and eyed me up. I liked the initiative, she said after a while, but the results leave me unimpressed. What the fuck happened in that place? I asked, and even though I could barely hear my own voice, she seemed like she heard every word. For a moment, the way she contemplated it, I thought I was gonna get a straight answer. You know my mother said men don't see ugly women. They know they exist, but they just poof them right out to their mind. Like a magic trick. She said we worked better being a little plain, good enough to take home for a night. Any more, and we'd start to leave problems everywhere we go. That guy was a problem. She was trying to warn me about the dangers of attention, but silly me, I went and got addicted. I hoped with you there might be a degree of separation, infatuation on a contractual basis. She took a deep breath like she'd had a long, hard day. I don't know. Maybe Mom was right. It's ridiculous, I suppose. The fly shouldn't admire the spider. It either sees it and fears it, or doesn't know what's coming until it's too late. I think Mom was telling me to go for the latter. It's no fun being invisible, though. You spent all that time looking at me, following me. What did you see? I looked at her until my eyes watered and something throbbed in my skull. I don't know. I tried to lie. Be honest. She looked right at me and something in the air changed. I don't know what. Hot. Jesus, it was hot. Like looking at the sun. I remember the heart rate monitor going nuts, and then I remember gossamer wings and serrated chitin. A tick on the inside of your cheek. A leech on your tongue. A horsehair worm that won't leave the skin. And then an instant later my eyes refocused, and there was just a normal woman in front of me. Someone I could have loved, I answered, unable to stop the words spilling like vomit. Someone who I thought deserved love. See, she said. Who wouldn't like your version better? I was crying again, heart racing. World like butter, going soft at the edges. Whatever she did, it was like undergoing brain surgery in real time. I'd like a recommendation, she said after another minute or two of silence. I'd like to see myself. I look in the mirror, and I don't see what you do. I'd like an artist to paint me. A version of me, at least. It won't be easy on them. All this time you've probably looked directly at me for no more than 5-10 minutes in total. Just didn't realize it. Always the back of my head or my hair obscuring just so. That won't do. I want a portrait. I ought to know what you see. What will you do to them? I won't do anything. Not intentionally. But if you ask someone to paint the sun, expect them to go blind. Whoever paints me will be painting the sun in their living room. Going blind is the least of their problems. Now, fess up. You know someone. You mentioned them once in passing. A cousin, maybe. An artist in need of cash. I'm sure of it. Why would I tell you anything? Because you love me, she said. And because despite everything you will get better, and you will come back to me. Year or two, I think. You are a diamond I have no hold on you, and you will think that for a long time. And this period of freedom, you'll enjoy it only by my good grace and mercy. You did a good job. Better than any before. I've read your notes and reports over and over, and seen details of myself I didn't even know were there. It's a thing of beauty, what you did. And one day soon you'll come back to me with some excuse for why you want the contract to continue. I tried to spit the word never, but managed, at best, a weak shake of the head. Something that put a most peculiar smile on her face. It doesn't work like that. It'd be like trying to brute force your way through Alzheimer's. You'll be back. Even now you're mine. All mine. I'm just being gentle. And you're going to give me the name and number of this artist, because even though you know I could no more love you than a spider loves the fly, you are desperate to please me. Because when I broke the man in that apartment building, when I tore him in two and told him that he would live for as long as I desired, writhing without air for years and years, drowning in sickly fluids, and trapped helplessly in a hive, he is determined to maintain even though I wouldn't be caught dead going back there. He was grateful. And with time, you'll be grateful too. She put the pen in my hand. She smiled, mouthed the word good boy, and God help me. I gave her my nephew's number. Hello, my name is Arigi Fisher. My therapist advised me to write down what I've been through, so I suppose I will. It's been a week, and I typically have bad memory, but I still remember everything vividly, so damn vividly. I'll try my best to recount the details, but after all I've been through, I can't promise it will be good. Now, where to begin? It started with a trip I decided to take. I was getting exhausted and tired with people and society, and really just life in general. I decided I'd go camping in some deep woods. I'd rather not state the location, however. Apologies for that. There were beautiful, lush trees. I could hear the birds singing and animals moving about. The bugs were a bit annoying, but it was worth it. The way the light filtered beneath the gently moving leaves, the soft breeze coming in from the west, the light rustling of foliage as small animals moved. It was a beautiful sight. I took the camping supplies I packed out of the back of my truck, double-checked I had everything, and decided to head north, since I came from the south. There weren't really many paths here. It was just wilderness, in some back road dead end I decided I'd go to. I wandered for a while in the woods, making sure to keep a map on hand, and a compass, tracing where I went. Eventually, I came across a nice-looking clearing. I cleared the area of rocks, debris, pieces of wood, and anything that would make sleeping rough. Then I set up my tent, a nice deep green small tent, just large enough for me and my travel pack. I checked the distance and time I'd hiked, and saw it was only about 1 kilometre and around 10 minutes. Just after, I looked to the sky to get a rough estimate of the time, and noticed the sun was beginning to set. On the other side of the horizon, I noticed a large amount of clouds rolling in, just my luck. No matter what it is, I always seem to forget something. It's usually just one thing, whether it's a spice in a recipe, or in this case, checking the weather. I decided I'd take a walk around where I set up before going to bed. I spent around 30 minutes or an hour or so. I'm bad at keeping track of time, just slowly walking around, admiring nature, before I decided to return to my tent. As I approached, I felt like something was off. The closer I got, the more the feeling grew and grew. I was having trouble figuring out exactly what it was, but then I noticed. The tarp on my tent was slightly damp. I felt a little nervous, since I'm generally a bit of a paranoid person, so I quietly walked around the perimeter of my tent. I didn't see anything odd. Finally, I ended at the entrance and noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I cautiously approached, listening carefully. As I got close, my nerves started acting up. Stupid anxiety. I told myself to just shrug it off, but I couldn't. I don't know why, but I froze. I was scared something would be in there. I managed, after about a minute of standing still with one hand reaching towards the door, to open the front of the tent. Everything was normal inside. I let out a long sigh of relief and felt around. Everything was dry, apart from a small damp patch near the door. The sun was almost down, and it was getting darker. I decided I'd go to bed now, as the sounds of wildlife were shifting from diurnal to nocturnal creatures. I laid down in my cozy little snug sleeping bag, made sure everything was neatly organized, still in my bed, and went to bed. I awoke to the sound of rain falling. I'd recon a few hours later, and felt a little groggy. I realized I had to go to the bathroom, which would mean having to leave the tent. I sighed deeply, part of me regretting my choice to camp, and I turned to go get my raincoat out of my bag. I always come prepared, even if I forget things. I paused as I shifted. Something didn't feel quite right. I listened to the sound of the rain falling for a while, before I noticed what it was. There was a wet splash coming from outside. I paused and listened carefully. I noticed it was following a pattern and sounded like large raindrops splashing in puddles. It was circling my tent, keeping the same pace while doing so. It was at that moment something else occurred to me. The raindrops on my tent were much lighter here and less frequent than those on the ground, coming from the direction of whatever was circling my tent. The rain was very light, apart from in that one specific area. Slowly, I reached over to my bag. I always stored a small pocket knife in the side pouch of my bag for self-defense. I wanted to make sure I was protected when I confronted whoever or whatever it was. Maybe it was just a really wet raccoon or something, sloshing up the water. I slowly crept to the edge of my tent and paused. I waited for the footsteps to go behind my tent, before I slowly zipped a small crack in the zipper so I could see out, as quietly and slowly as I could. I waited for what felt like forever, but, as cliché as this is, was likely just a few seconds. I know that's something that's said a lot, but you really don't realize how accurate it is until you've experienced it yourself. I heard the footsteps approaching where I was peeking, and to my horror I saw some strange-looking thing. It was about the size of a human, but appeared to be made entirely of water. I couldn't make out too much of its features due to the darkness of night and clouds, but I did notice the shine of water and the dripping. I felt like I was being watched, like it knew I was here, like it was going to come for me sooner or later, or it was waiting for me to make a move. I slowly shifted back inside and started to breathe to calm my nerves. In, hold, out, pause. I started to focus again and, still listening to the sounds, slowly and quietly made sure to get myself in order, putting on my raincoat, getting my bag ready and putting it on. I made sure I was holding my keys in a way that I could easily unlock my car when I got there. I waited for the thing to move in front of my tent. I watched as it walked by, and as soon as I was sure it wouldn't see me, carefully and quietly, but swiftly, opened the door. I took a deep breath, and as I heard it was on the opposite side, I thanked past me for facing the tent towards the car, and I started sprinting. Immediately, I heard whatever it was start chasing, and I heard the splashing of its footsteps. I heard my tent tear as it ran through it. I'd estimate at the same pace as me, or ever so slightly slower. I couldn't slow down, I couldn't mess up. I ran through the trees, weaving my way through, and I heard several loud slaps of water against the trees, seeming like it didn't need to navigate through the trees. I was almost to where my car was when I tripped on a root and landed with a hard thump, catching myself with my hands on a rock. This was it. I was done for. I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I heard its weight shift, and I felt a massive amount of pain on my side, and I passed out. I woke up a few hours later in a lot of pain. The sun was out, and I could hear the wildlife. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't dead, and I immediately shifted over to check my bag, and to no longer be face down on a muddy rock. As soon as I did, a searing pain shot through my right side. I looked down and noticed I was wounded. My bag was torn apart, my shirt with a large gash and bleeding. The wound was deep, but not too deep. I'm lucky it didn't kill me, but I felt lightheaded and hazy. The bleeding seemed to have stopped due to my shirt being slightly displaced, and the wetness causing it to cling to my body. I used my torn and broken backpack to cover the wound, grabbed as much of the contents as I could, and quickly headed to my truck. The windows of my truck were cracked, and a lot of the paint seemed to be damaged. I quickly found my keys. Luckily they hadn't slipped out of my hand, and opened the door. I then dropped everything in the passenger's seat. I was about to go retrieve the rest of my items and equipment when I heard a soft splash, splash. I immediately got into my truck, started the engine, and drove out of there, returning home. Before I was gone, however, I noticed a blurry silhouette in the rear view mirror. I decided I didn't want to see it more clearly. I relayed all of this to my therapist, and he suggested I say what happened. So, I guess writing it down did help a bit. I still worry that it's out there, but I know for damn sure I'll never get near it, and I'll never camp again. Skinned over. My first mistake was coming here at all. I saw my uncle's cabin silhouetted in the setting sun as my old, beat-up Chevy rattled along the dusty dirt road toward the lake. It rolled up the gravelled driveway and made its signature squeal as I hit the brakes and put it in park. As I stepped out the vehicle, I was chilled by a piercing October breeze. I still had hope that this weekend getaway would be a good use of my paid time off, but I admit that hope was dwindling. A scene from a movie. A young man takes his girlfriend up to the mountains, to a lakeside cabin, just when all the leaves have faded to lush tones of crimson, amber, and gold. And when the moment is just right, when the sun is real low, and the water is all aglow at that magical hour of twilight, the boy gets on one knee and pops the question, diamond ring in hand. That's what I had in mind when I begged my uncle to let me stay a few days at his secluded summer getaway cabin he bought cheap the year prior. He was a grumpy old man, but he still had a heart. It should have been perfect. It should have been one of the happiest weekends of both our lives, which is why I was so unbelievably baffled when she dumped me. Maybe the writing on the wall was too obvious. Maybe she didn't want to marry me. Maybe there was someone else. Who knows? Who cares, really? Somehow, I found myself single just a day before we were meant to head up to a remote spot in the mountains of Utah. And, for some reason, I found myself up there alone. I don't know. It seemed like it'd be a nice place to brood, to feel sorry for myself. I didn't much care to tell anyone about our breakup. As far as my family was concerned, I'd be coming down the mountain a few days later with my new fiancé. I didn't know what I'd tell them. I hardly understood it myself. A weekend at Uncle Rob's cabin would give me plenty of time to mull it all over, or so went my thinking. I filled my lungs with fresh, crisp air. It felt good. I was lucky in getting to the spot before the sun set entirely. It had been a long drive, and all I wanted was to lay down in a soft bed. An old set of keys jingled and jangled as I twirled them around my index finger. I whistled a chipper tune on my way to the front door, trying to act happier than I was. The key turned, the door opened. The musky smell of wood filled my nostrils as I stepped inside. It was dark. I turned on my phone's flashlight in search of a light switch. Aha! I said upon my discovery of one. I flipped it, and nothing happened. I flipped it a few more times, as if it'd make a difference. I found another, and tried flipping it another 2 or 3 times as well. There was no power. I set down my backpack that housed all my effects. I half considered getting back in my truck and driving away right then and there, but figured I should at least give my uncle a call first. The phone rang, and it rang some more. "This is Rob Ward. Leave a message." I sighed. The phone rang again. Once, twice, 3 times. Hal, honey, how's it going? The question was an emotional gut punch. "Not so good, Mom. You ever lose the love of your life without even knowing why?" I took a deep breath. "Hey, yeah, it's going great. We're up here at the cabin, just getting settled in. I just had a quick question for Rob, but he's not picking up his phone." "Oh, that's great, honey. I'm glad you made it up there safe. How's Jessica? Is she in a good mood?" "Make sure she's in a good mood before, well, you know." I'm not on speaker, am I? What? No, she's fine. I'm not. I'm not proposing to her at all, Mom. She's not here. In fact, she doesn't want anything to do with me. I'm all by myself in the middle of nowhere. What a great idea. I'm a genius, Mom. I'm waiting till tomorrow. I just had a question for Rob and wondered if you could try getting a hold of him. Oh, that's great, sweetie. And yes, you've called at a good time. He's over here, actually. He and Dad are watching the game right now, but I think it's gone to commercials. I'll bring him the phone. A moment passed. I heard the sound of a phone changing hands. Yeah. Rob's gruff voice came over the speaker. Hey, Rob. Who's winning? For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of TV in the background. What do you need? He said in his habitual growly monotone. So, there's no power up here. Seems like I tried turning on the lights. Talking to Rob always made me uncomfortable. Could never tell what he's thinking, and he made no effort in the realm of niceties. Generator. In the back. And with that, he handed the phone back to my mother. It's me again, Hal. Make sure when you do it, you. Yep, thanks, Mom. I have to go now, okay? Okay, sweetie. I love you. Tell Jessica I said. Love you too. I'll tell her you said hi. I hit the end call button hastily. I didn't like lying to my mother. Nor did I want to talk any more about Jessica. Of course there's a generator. Obviously. I muttered to myself as I made my way out the back door. This place was way too far out to be hooked up to any grid. I was downright lucky there was cell service at all. All that was left of the sun were the last mauve tones of dusk that silhouetted the pine trees on the horizon as clusters of black, needly branches. My phone's flashlight illuminated the way down the back deck, casting long, stark shadows as the radius of light hit overgrown grass, large rocks, and the like, nearly rolling my ankle as I clambered over the uneven terrain. I looked up and saw a thick wire extending from the cabin to the inside of an old tool shed at the edge of the property. I made my way to it, but the door was locked. I fumbled through my pocket and found the keys Rob had given me. There were 3 in total. I tried the first. No dice. I didn't try the second. It was way too big. The third unlocked the door, which swung open with a sickening creak. Inside the small wooden shed was the generator, along with all the tools one would need to maintain a place like this. All sorts of pliers, wrenches, drills, a box cutter, and a hefty axe. The generator had a recoil starter like a lawn mower. I pulled it, but there was nothing except the short-lived whirring sound of an attempt at revving up. The tank of propane attached was probably empty. Thankfully, there were no less than 3 more of them next to it. Once the fresh tank was attached, it started with a roar. The cabin flickered to life like a beacon in the pitch-dark forest. We're in business, I thought. As I exited the shed, the generator seemed to start making an odd sound. A feral screeching sort of noise, harsh against the ears for sure. I'd never been mechanically savvy, but it looked to be running all right from what I could tell. The sound continued as I made my way back to the cabin. In fact, it got a bit louder. I looked out over the back deck. Was it coming from the generator, or was it coming from the forest behind it? I put away the thought. It creaked me out. I shut the door and locked it behind me. I locked the front door too, just for good measure. In the new light, I saw that the cabin was in worse condition than I thought it would be. What little paint there was peeling. The wood was practically rotting. Dirt and dust caked nearly every inch of the place. What a letdown. Maybe it's good I didn't bring Jessica here. Jessica. The name made my heart hurt. I needed to get my mind off her. The wind was howling, probably blowing through all sorts of holes in the cabin's exterior. I had to wear my jacket at all times. I looked at my phone and saw it was only a little past 7 p.m., too early to drown my sorrows in sleep. It was time to start thinking about the way in which I'd spend the rest of my evening. Internet wasn't an option, of course, so I figured I'd try something new and actually read a book I've been meaning to for years. After a while, the generator suddenly stopped making the horrible shrieking sound it had been. Or, at least, whatever had been making it stopped. Glad that sorted itself out, I thought. A few chapters of Pet Sematary later, and I needed to take a leak. The bathroom was just as dingy, cramped, and outdated as the rest of the house. After doing my duty, on my way back to the living area, I caught a glimpse of something in the window in the top of the back door. I didn't want to think it, but my stomach sank. It looked like the top of someone's shaved head. I froze. Was someone really there? If it was a person, they were standing perfectly still, facing the door, but I couldn't be sure. They'd have to be intimidatingly tall for me to be able to see the tip of their head. I tried to steady my breathing. There was no need to panic. As I took a step toward the door, the shape darted to the right. I ran to the door. There was no easy locking mechanism on the inside. I had to use the key. After struggling to fit the correct key into the hole in my adrenaline-induced zeal, I flung open the old wooden door and looked in the direction it went. I saw nothing but dark shapes, all still in the quiet of night, except the steady silhouetted swaying of branches in the wind. I called out, "Hello." My voice was tentative. I wasn't sure I wanted whatever it was to hear me. I took a deep breath. I called again, louder this time. "Hello." Nothing. No one. I turned on my phone's flashlight. At the edge of my vision, I could see it. The door of the toolshed was wide open. I muttered an expletive to myself. What if it was in there? Was it a person? It must have been. A bald man, tall, with pasty white skin. I approached the shed, one step at a time. I could feel my heart pounding wildly inside my chest. I spoke again, a whisper this time. "Is someone in there?" Surely not. Surely there wasn't a stranger inside the shed. What would they be doing there? What reason could they have? Flashlight in hand, I peered inside the shed. Nothing. For a moment, relief spread over me. I even felt myself smile. I poked my head inside and looked to the left, where the generator was. It was there too. It towered over me. Naked and pale, it just stood there with its face pointed in my direction. I ran. If I hadn't just pissed, I'd have done it then. I wasn't looking where I was going. I tripped over a rock and hit the ground hard. I yelled in frustration. I didn't feel a thing. My only concern was getting inside the cabin. But my back was turned. My back was turned, and that thing was somewhere behind me. The thing without a face, no eyes, no mouth. I scrambled to my feet and didn't look back. Into the light. I made it. I was inside. But I wasn't going to stick around. Where were my car keys? On the couch. I took them into my hand and threw on my backpack. I was out the front door in 30 seconds. Getting myself to take another step into the dark was like pulling teeth, but I managed. I sprinted to the car. My hands were shaking so much I dropped the keys. It was right behind me. I could feel it. Or at least, I imagined it. I didn't dare look to find out. "Come on." I screamed as I picked the keys up off the ground. I unlocked the door. I jumped inside. I turned the key. The engine stalled. No. Expletives flew out my mouth at a pace they never before had. I tried again and gave some gas. My old Chevy roared to life. When the headlights came on, I was sure I'd see him standing there, but whatever it was nowhere to be seen. It was only a small comfort. I put her in reverse and was soon on my way down that lonely dirt road. I hoped, downright prayed, that I was heading in the right direction, but I couldn't think. All that occupied my mind was what I saw in that shed. It was then I saw something that should have scared me more than the man without a face. A single snowflake hit my windshield. The snow fell heavier and heavier by the second. The windshield wipers were on full blast. The radio turned to static. I didn't understand how the weather could have changed so drastically so quickly, and so early in the year. I felt like God was punishing me. Why now? A couple miles down the dirt path, I emerged onto a narrow asphalt road. This was where I had come from. I was going the right way. All was pitch dark except for my car's headlights. I couldn't see more than 15 feet in front of me. The snow was starting to stick on the ground, but I didn't slow down. I had to get away from there. It was a mistake. It was all such a mistake. The road made a sharp turn left down the mountain. I very nearly went off the side of a cliff. My heart was pounding, my head ached. I went to wipe the sweat from off my brow. I didn't see the creature that leaped in front of my car. The impact was hard. I hit the brakes and spun the wheel more than I should have as the thing flew over my cracked windshield. A second impact. I had rammed my poor old Chevy right into a tree. It was all a blur. I must have hit my head on the wheel. I was lucky I didn't go flying out the windshield. The car was totaled, and my leg hurt. I opened the car door and fell onto the snowy ground. I couldn't see a thing. I could feel myself losing consciousness. I just wanted to go to sleep, and so I did. It was some time before I awoke with a start. I was freezing cold and covered in a thick blanket of snow, which was still falling just as hard. The white snow at least reflected what little moonlight pierced the veil of clouds above, making it possible to see the landscape around me. The deer that I had hit lay dormant nearby, as stiff as could be. How long had I been out? I tried sitting up. My leg, it was so painful. I brought out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The snow was red with blood from a deep gash in my left shin. It made me nauseous to look at. It was 11 p.m., and I had 13 missed calls from my mother. I could guess why. The storm had blanketed everything in 6 inches of snow. I tried calling her back. No service. I tried calling 911. Not a chance. Am I going to die out here? I didn't want to die. I really didn't want to die. Then get up how? I heard my Uncle Rob's voice in my head, of all people. I thought of my mom and dad. I thought of Jessica. I forced myself to my feet. I took a step forward. Searing pain shot through my leg. I was shivering in the cold. I didn't know what I was going to do, except that I was going to survive, somehow. I can hardly remember what happened next, but I can guess. Hours of uphill shuffling in the dark, gritting my teeth through the pain. It didn't make sense how I ended up back at that cabin, but that's exactly what happened. The sun was close to rising. I could see the world brighten a bit, but the clouds overhead were still loath to let the sunlight through. The cabin's bright lights led me to it, like a lighthouse on the shore. It was the only thing for miles around, and my only hope of survival. The place looked so different in the fog, buried in snow. Gone was the beauty of autumn, replaced with the biting dreariness of a cold, lonely winter. And somewhere in the woods, whether near or far, was the man whose face was skinned over. The front door was wide open. I went inside. It wasn't much warmer, but at least I was sheltered from the heavy snowfall. I checked my phone again. Still no service. I wondered how long it would be before rescue arrived, or if it would arrive at all. With no car, no cell service, a dwindling phone battery, and a gaping wound, things looked grim. My best hope was to wait for the storm to clear enough that I could get a call through. My leg was still bleeding. The cold, I imagine, numbed the pain, but that was hardly a good thing. I limped to the bedroom and tore the sheets off the bed into several thin strips, which I used to tightly bandage the gash after cleaning it with tap water. It was all I could do. I bundled myself into the remaining blankets and drifted to sleep. I was absolutely exhausted. I have no idea how long it was before a sudden clattering woke me up. I didn't have to wonder what had caused it. I knew it was that thing again. A lump formed in my throat. I felt so safe and warm in those blankets, and I could hardly move my legs without burning pain scorching my nervous system. But I was in mortal danger. I heaved myself up on my aching feet and peeked out the door of the bedroom. All was still. The cabin was small, consisting of a living area, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. I could see nearly the whole house from my position in the doorway. Another crash. This time, I heard where it had come from. Beneath me. How could it be beneath me? I was absolutely defenseless. The tool shed. I remembered the axe resting against the wall. I limped as fast as I could out the back door. The snow reached halfway up my calves. I paused at the doorway. I remembered seeing the creature in that shed. I had caught only a flash in the stark light from my phone, but the image was burned into memory. A tall, hairless man wearing nothing at all, pasty white except blue veins. Smooth skin where his face should have been. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. It wasn't there. I let out a sigh of relief, but the anxiety returned tenfold. It isn't in the shed. It's under the house. I grabbed the axe. As I turned around, I realized where the sound had come from. Next to the cabin was an open hatch leading to a basement that I hadn't noticed before. He's in there. I gathered my courage. I finish this, once and for all. I'm coming for you, you bastard. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. I hardly felt the wound in my leg as I limped down those steep concrete stairs. The air was rank, and all was dark. "Come out," I shouted. "Come out, you freak." I couldn't see a thing except the dark silhouettes of various effects. Boxes, shelves, and the like. Various objects were scattered along the ground, surely the source of the crashing noises I heard. "I know you're in here," I said. For all my macho energy in that moment, I still fell backwards in horror when I saw him stand from his hunched position in the corner. I dropped the axe. I couldn't breathe. It was just a shadow, a thin, ghostly image staring at me from the other side of the room. Imagine my surprise when he raised his hands in surrender. "What?" I stuttered. He maintained the pose. "Don't come any closer," I said. I meant for it to sound threatening, but only the sounds of desperate fear escaped my mouth. "Tell me what you are." I grabbed the axe again and used it to push myself up off the ground. He remained silent and motionless. I scanned the room for a light source of some kind. There was a pull chain in the center of the room. "Don't move," I said as I shuffled my way there. "I mean it." I pulled the chain, and a single bulb lit up the cellar. Standing before me in the dim light was a thin man, probably 6'5". He was totally naked, but he had no sexual organs. Everything was smooth like a Ken doll. I could hear strained, muffled breathing coming from where his mouth should have been. His raised arms conveyed a message. I mean you no harm. Do you need help? I asked. He nodded his head. The man was sat on the old sofa. I sat across from him on a chair, just looking him over, again and again. I didn't understand how any of this was possible. I had a box cutter in my hand. I'm going to cut open the skin covering your mouth so you can breathe, I said. He tensed up, but nodded again. I moved closer to him and raised the blade. This is disgusting, I thought. I plunged a shallow blade into his face. Blood spurt out onto my own. The man clenched his fists. Clearly, it hurt. Breath passed through the hole I made. I cut more, until a somewhat mouth-shaped hole adorned him, caked in blood. He heaved in a great breath and tried coughing, but something was still wrong. I looked into his mouth. There was no tongue, no teeth, no red or pink flesh. It was all that same smooth, clammy skin, extending all the way down his esophagus. "My God," I whispered. The man shook, probably in pain. He raised a trembling finger to his face, gesturing to the spot where his eyes should be. That's where I cut next. A single wild eye emerged from the bloody gash I inflicted on his flesh. It was bloodshot and full of fear. I moved on to the next, put the triangular blade of the box cutter into the bleeding skin, and carved a slit into his smooth face. But I cut too deeply. The blade scraped across his eye. Blood sprayed out of the wound like a fountain. He jerked back in pain and held his hand to his now blind left eye. He knocked the box cutter out of my hand. It clattered to the floor. "I'm sorry," I shot out. The man emitted a choked, gagged, muffled noise that must have been cries of pain. He hunched himself into a ball on the couch and trembled. What was going on? What in the world had happened to this man? My head throbbed, as did my leg. Cold sweat dripped down my face. This was a nightmare. I didn't know how much worse things could be. I heard a sound coming from outside the cabin. It was like a moan, deep and long, almost like a whale's call. The man's head perked up. His good eye stared out the front window. He looked to me. What is that? Dread filled my soul's every pore. The sound came again. The man leaped to his feet and dashed out the back door into the forest, into the fog and the snow. I stood and limped to the window. I saw something emerge from the lake. It saw me too. A great amorphous shape obscured in the fog. It moaned as it moved towards the cabin. I hunched down and desperately gasped. I had been holding my breath. What do I do? What do I do? The window darkened. I looked up. Pressed against the glass was a wall of skin. My mouth opened in horror. The glass cracked. I scrambled out the back door, the same way the man had gone. The axe. I thought, like an axe would make a difference. The window broke, and that awful moan came again, but I didn't look back. I rushed down the stairs of the deck and into the cellar. I held the axe in my hands, but I didn't feel any safer. The creature was right behind me. Down the steep stairs, the pulsating blob moved with the sound of wet meat slapping against stone. It was made entirely of saggy, fatty skin. What resembled human limbs were bent out at odd angles all over its body. It was so large it scraped the ceiling. On its head, I thought it looked like a head of sorts, was no face. It was a long tube of wrinkly skin, like an elephant's trunk, wide enough to swallow a man whole. In a final act of desperate defiance, I swung the axe into its side. When I tried pulling it out, I quickly realized it was stuck. Skin moved from the creature to the axe, swallowing it into itself. The thing's proboscis swung towards me and caught me in the face. It clasped over my head. The air was sucked out around me. I couldn't breathe. The tube of pulsating skin wrapped all around my body and began swallowing me into the greater mass of the monster. I felt flabby, cold skin surround me, caress me, become a part of me. I opened my mouth to scream, and the skin coated the inside of me. Inside my mouth, inside my throat, my lungs, my stomach, all lined with new skin. It all tightened around me, melded with my own nervous system and blood vessels. It was my skin now as much as it was the creature's. I understand now what the sound I heard the night prior was, the sound I thought I heard from the forest behind my Uncle Rob's cabin. It was screaming, shrieking, soul-piercing cries. I understand, because those are the sounds I found myself making as the thing made me a part of itself, before returning again to the bottom of that lake. I screamed and screamed till my vocal cords gave out. I wished that someone would hear me. I wished that someone would help. But no help would come until the snow on that mountain was cleared. Until then, I was left to myself. Blind, starving, hardly able to breathe. Skinned over.